Hey everyone, my name's Carell, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of the simplest, most straightforward of traps in Meet Your Maker, the Impaler trap. Now the Impaler, like all damaging traps, will of course one-shot the raider, but unlike the bolt shot trap, it only has a range of one tile. Now unmodded, at first glance it's going to look like a strictly worse bolt shot trap. It has terrible range, it is only 60% of the cost, so it's a good bit cheaper. But it also has a similar warning profile for the raiders, so they're going to get alerted pretty easily. It also requires one block of clearance that requires that full block that the spikes extend in order to actually extend those spikes, of course. And it can't share space with other traps that require clearance or with solid blocks as a result. Now, raiders walking through a hallway filled with these Impaler traps without stopping will just walk straight through them. It'll bypass all of the Impalers easily. So that's a lot of disadvantages. However, the spike trap has a few advantages. It activates after about 1 second instead of 1.5 seconds for the bolt shot. So if I walk over here and activate both of these traps, you'll see that the spike trap over here activated significantly faster than the actual bolt shot trap. You're also not going to deflect the spikes with a light sword. Not going to happen, don't even try. Though of course you can destroy the spike trap or the spikes with the light sword without any issue whatsoever. So that's of limited concern. Also, destroying the spike trap with a grenade to prevent its activation is of kind of debatable usefulness given the limited range. Don't try that either. Now, additionally, shields of any kind are going to block all damage and destroy the trap. Interestingly, even deploying the deployable shield near a spike trap is sufficient to destroy it. That will immediately destroy the trap. It won't even attempt to go off. However, even if you deploy the shield a bit further away and it doesn't initially contact the trap, if the trap attempts to deploy and the spikes encounter the shield, that will again also destroy the trap. The same thing applies to the arc barrier shield equipment. That will immediately destroy any spikes that come into contact with it, so again, it will make you completely immune to Impaler traps. Alright, so let's start taking a look at the mods for the Impaler trap. The first one we're going to take a look at here is Blockade. This allows the spikes to remain extended for a total of about 5 seconds. This acts very similarly to a Death Piston mod of the same name, and also similarly to the Death Piston, an Incinerator trap will very happily fire through those extended spikes. Now, unlike the Death Piston though, the Impaler cannot be modded to kill the raider on contact with the side of the extended spikes. So this mod is mostly useless except as a cheap Death Piston stand-in, if you will. Now, one quirk of the Blockade mod is that while contact with the sides of the spikes will not kill you, contact with the tips will. So that is a little bit different, though very similar still to Death Piston functionality with that same mod applied. Looking through the other mods here, we have Unrelenting. This causes the trap to trigger repeatedly, so it doesn't have just one shot anymore, it has infinite shots. That is of somewhat limited utility given that the trap is always going to be in close proximity to the raider, who will therefore always have a means of destroying it immediately, but in some circumstances you can make good use of it. We've also got the Self-destruct mod over here. This will cause the trap to explode 3 seconds after being destroyed. Note this does not explode when the spikes are expended, so that one charge that you get by default, if that's expended, the trap does not explode. Only when the raider or another projectile actively destroys the trap does it start that 3-second countdown and then explode. We also have the standard second wave mod. This hides the trap until the gen mat is picked up, after which it'll go through that standard 4-second arming period and then be primed and ready to trigger the next time it sees a raider. Now, the obvious use of the Impaler trap is in small, narrower corridors, especially on things like the roof after a descending ramp, or a descending ramp after a flat hallway, or the floor after an ascending ramp, or something like around the blind corner where the raider is less likely to spot it and destroy it just before it has a chance to trigger. Now, these placements are all pretty good, and they'll kill raiders who aren't paying attention or who are distracted by something else. However, long-term, these placements are not going to be as effective as using the Impaler in more technical ways. Effectively using Impalers requires the builder to play with the raider's attention. For instance, allowing the raider to just barely see some sort of a nasty trap that they want to deal with that is hidden just out of sight up in this ceiling area, in the roof of a small hallway, and then have an Impaler underneath. I want to go up here and destroy this bomb trap, so I'm going to lean out here and do that. But then I've got an Impaler going off behind me that can very easily kill me if I'm not paying attention, or if I fixate too much on this bomb trap above me. In general, with Impaler traps, you want to stop the raider. You want to force them into a corner, or backwards through a doorway, or you want to leave a safe spot in a high-intensity room, and then place an Impaler trap there. You want to, in general, control the raider's location, and once you know where the raider is going to be, always do your best to put an Impaler there. These things activate the quickest out of almost any trap in the game, and they will kill raiders if you place them appropriately. Now, I've seen a lot of debate as to whether or not you should mod Impalers. Now, most of them, in my opinion, should not be modded, and that is for one main reason. The main draw of the Impaler trap is that it's cheap. It is very, very cheap. It is one of the cheapest actual damaging traps in the game. And 2 mods brings the price of an Impaler trap up to 50, which is the price of a bolt shot trap, which is generally more capable. Or at least an unmodded bolt shot trap. So there's a few exceptions to that rule, though. The Unrelenting mod in particular can be exceptionally useful if the raider can be expected to traverse an area multiple times without destroying that Impaler trap. For instance, over in this little corner over here, you notice that when I went up to kill this bomb trap, this Impaler triggered, and I ended up killing the bomb trap pretty easily and then getting my bolt back without the Impaler triggering a second time. If that Impaler had had Unrelenting on it, it very well might have gotten me with the second trigger because I would not have been expecting it. Now, the Impaler trap is going to be best off with Unrelenting if you can keep the raiders focused somewhere other than the trap for an extended period of time. A lot of raiders will assume that once they trigger the trap once, that it's done, it's gone. You don't need to pay attention to that anymore. And they're off focusing somewhere else anyway that is also probable to kill them, so they need to not pay attention to that trap anymore, so they'll dismiss it from their memory. And in that case, Unrelenting can be an excellent way of catching those raiders off guard. However, if you don't keep the raiders' attention off of the Impaler trap, the Impaler will almost certainly get destroyed immediately because no one likes getting spiked. It's embarrassing. All raiders hate these things. So they're going to immediately destroy the trap if they even think it might still be a threat. So save your Unrelenting for some time when you can keep the raiders' focus on something else that is likely going to continue to be a threat. And that way the raider will likely trigger the trap once and then assume it's done, and you can hopefully get them with a second shot. Now, as for the other mods, Second Wave is of course useful for, well, second wave traps. Blockade doesn't serve a whole lot of purpose that isn't also served by the more effective Death Piston, and the Death Pistons are a lot more likely to catch people off guard since they extend without the raider's intervention. They don't require that raider to walk through the area before they trigger. So in general, even though Blockade can be used to make a pseudo Death Piston at a much cheaper cost, generally you're just going to be better off using a Death Piston. Now, Self-destruct, on the other hand, is an extremely interesting mod. It allows the Impaler to create a short-lived kind of no-go zone when you destroy it, and the raider doesn't want to inhabit that. They don't want to stick anywhere near that scary sound effect of the Impaler going off and exploding. So if I shoot this thing, you can hear it spools up, and it's going to explode, and it's really dangerous, except I'm within a 1-block radius of it. The actual explosion isn't that big. Sure, if I'm right up close to it here, I'm going to die from the explosion, but really it's not that scary. However, in terms of psychological effects on the raider, it is very scary. It's a big, noisy explosion. It's really obnoxious. You think you're going to die if you're anywhere near that, even if that's not the case. So raiders will avoid that explosion sound like the plague. They know it's spooling up, they've got 3 seconds to be elsewhere, and it will force them to move, even if it's not actually that big of a threat. Raiders will get scared of this, and they will move on, and you can use that to drive them into other trap setups. That's very effective and can really mess with speedrunners by stressing them out. Now additionally, anyone that goes up to hit this in melee, which is a common tactic for dealing with these spike traps, is going to immediately see that explosion and they're going to back off. Now, they're in melee. They have 3 seconds from the time that that explosion starts to walk about this far. But that's not what they're going to do. They're not going to stop right there because it's a very loud explosion. They want to get as far away from it as possible. It's scary sounding. So they're going to walk in and hit this thing in melee, and then they're going to immediately back off, or they're going to immediately run forward in order to get away from that big scary explosion. And again, you can use that to either drive them away from the spike trap in a backwards or forwards direction. Now, as you might have noticed, the spike trap or impaler trap will also destroy other traps nearby when it explodes with the self-destruct mod. That doesn't seem like it's very useful. In fact, it seems kind of counterproductive. Until you start looking at hollow cubes. Hollow cubes are kind of a special case for this. The area denial of the trap is really useful, but as we've seen, it's not actually all that effective. But you can do some really weird things when you combine it with hollow cubes, specifically hollow cubes with masquerade on them. So in this setup, I have this spike trap here. There's a guard hidden behind a hollow cube that's up there. The raider really has no reason to go up there. They're going to look up there. They're going to see that there's no bomb trap, which is one of the obvious things they might expect up there. There's nothing else up there. They really don't have a reason to go up there. And likewise, if they trigger the trap, nothing happens there. Not all that scary. But most raiders are going to destroy the trap anyway because they want the XP for it. And so I destroy that trap. It pops the hollow cube, which happens to have masquerade on it. And I have a guard in the hallway. That's not expected, and that will catch a lot of raiders off guard, and it's really kind of surprise to a lot of people. Now, of course, the way you set this up is to have the impaler trap, and you have a hollow cube up here. The hollow cube you probably want to have picture perfect, otherwise it's going to stand out like a sore thumb, and you need this masquerade mod that will prevent guards from pathing through it normally. Then all you have to do is come up here, record a guard patrol, have the guard walk out, and look around a little bit, and then patrol to wherever you want it to. Now looking at that again, I can pop that trap again, and we'll see that the guard drops down right after that explosion goes off, and since I did a little 360 spin there, you can see it immediately located me and started trying to attack me. So obviously this impaler trap placement is not ideal, and you'll probably want something a lot more subtle that looks like an impaler trap that's actually a threat here. A single impaler trap in the middle of nowhere is just going to raise suspicions because it's not really a threat to anyone. But obviously you can use this in a more concealed location. You can make the impaler trap itself a threat, you can make the explosion a threat, and then once the raider is done combating all of that, you can have a guard drop out of nowhere and start charging them. Now finally, you can kind of execute timing chains. And what I mean by that is I can set a bunch of spike traps up in a hallway or something, such that if I destroy one of them, it starts exploding, it explodes another, which explodes another, which explodes another, and I can keep that chain going as long as I want to. Each of the traps adds about 3 seconds of delay, and so you can use that to execute something at a specific time in the future. However, that's dependent on the raider destroying a trap or you having another trap trigger that will destroy this trap, so yeah, it's of debatable usefulness. Also, it's a chain of explosions. It's loud. The raider's going to notice it. It's pretty obvious to everyone what's going on there, and it's also very expensive in terms of capacity because each 3-second timer here is 40 capacity. So this little hallway here just cost me 200 capacity to execute with just those 5 traps. Not exactly a stellar way of doing timing. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. I hope you all have a great day, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video, where we'll review the block that everyone has a love-hate relationship with, the corrosive cube.